Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Conscious Marketer Podcast. It's Richard here. Hi, Kylie.
Hey there.
And today we're excited to be sharing wisdom with Scott Perry. He runs a company called Creative on Purpose. He is a master in the art of encore living, finding fulfillment, forging meaning, and making your life's biggest contribution after retirement. And let me share a few fun facts about Scott that we can talk about. One is he goes for a run every day at the cemetery and quotes Marcus Aurelius more than he should. He's recently retired from a 25-year career as a professional musician and also as a head coach for Seth Godin's Akimbo workshops. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much. We've spent a lot of time together this year, but every moment I get to spend with you is always illuminating. So I'm so excited to be here. It's a privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, and Scott's going to talk today about living your legacy, which I think is a wonderful topic. And I know I'm coming up on 50 here, so I'm entering a different phase. And he's going to share with us a bit about the 3 acts of life, hearing and heeding the call of your vocation, encore-preneurship. So that's a really cool word. And then, especially for these times, how to navigate uncertainty and adversity. Maybe, Scott, you could just start off by giving us a little bit of your background so we know a little bit more about you and how you came into your life's work here.
Sure. Well, thanks to Kylie and the great work she does on origin stories in your programs, I have about 38 I could choose from, but I'll choose a moment that really applies to the topic at hand today. When I was in the 7th grade, I was headed down a really bad path. I was a little bit of a troublemaker, was not doing well in school. And my parents took it upon themselves to get in touch with the headmaster of a little private school that was in town that they couldn't afford. And they said, "Hey, our kid is really turning into a screw up. Could you take him for a tour and can we work something out?" And I ended up getting a scholarship to go to this school where suddenly I was, instead of 1 out of 30 kids in a classroom, I was in basically a 2-room schoolhouse with just 6 other kids. And I had 2 teachers. And one of them, Don Kelly, gave me a copy of Marcus Aurelius Meditations, which has been one of my handbooks for living ever since. And then the other teacher, Scott Diddell, taught us about the Bhagavad Gita. And I bought a copy of that and I've used that as a manual for the rest of my life. And so a lot of the work that I do now, so for those that aren't familiar with those books, Marcus Aurelius Meditations is one of the Stoic texts that is a manual for the art of living. And it's about being, having intention, having integrity, and being of service to others. And then the Bhagavad Gita is a book about heeding the call of your true soul's purpose and the perils of not doing that. And so those 2 books have informed everything I do. You mentioned that I was a professional musician for 25 years. I had a guitar studio for 20 years. I've been a coach in Seth Godin's programs for several years. And now it just feels like right now, those 2 texts, my long study of self-improvement, vocation, hearing the call of vocation, are really coming into fruition in this new, relatively new program called the Art of Encore Living. And so that's a little bit about me.
I love that. And when you talked about Bhagavad Gita and also the 3 acts of life, I was like, I see a lot of correlation there. I've studied a lot of those texts. And also when I think about like Shakespeare or any of the older plays with the comedy and the tragedies and the drama, there's also like 3 acts, and they use that in Hollywood. So there's just like correlations with the number 3 in everything, every religion, every culture. So I would love to hear from your perspective. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's well, I love the insight that you just shared about the 3 acts of life corresponding to the 3 acts of a play. And the books that I write always have 3 acts as well, because just a note from my music background, the brain can really process rhythm in 2s or 3s. And so all the other rhythms that we have, like 4/4, 5/10, whatever, they're all, or 5/8 rather, they're all combinations of 2s and 3s. And so 3 really is like the magic number if you can get 3. So the way that most people talk about this is, the first act of life is your youth, when you are learning and you are exploring. You're engaged in the youthful pursuit of defining who you are and learning about the world. Second act of life is about career and family. And the third act of life is when you are not validating yourself based on external measurements, but are doing more internal work, and you're concerned about this idea of living or leaving a legacy. And one of the things that we've talked about at Creative on Purpose and in the art of encore living is that if you live from the inside out and you engage in if you get in touch with your soul's purpose and live into your soul's purpose, that you will not only leave a legacy, but you will be living it at the same time. So it's not just the money and monuments you leave behind, but it's the difference that you're making right now.
As you move into your next act here, can you tell us a bit more about encore-preneurship and what that means, and how are you living your legacy and creating that right now in your own life? I'm kind of curious.
Well, you and Kylie have been immensely helpful in this, because I kind of came to this idea during the Conscious Launch Accelerator when, as you all know, I had a program called Live Your Legacy. And it was about finding fulfillment, forging meaning, and making a difference in your life's third act. And in the process of trying to clarify the branding and the messaging around that, I tripped over this word called encore-preneurship, which is basically being nearing or in retirement age and beginning a new venture that leverages your wisdom and your experience to do meaningful work with the four people you care about. And so my primary audience is people that are 45 plus, that are already engaged in some sort of encore-preneurial venture, that are stuck or wanting to scale. But we also have resources for people that are just getting started. We have a process for how you can dial in the difference only you can make, so that you can use that as a springboard to get a jump start on your encore-preneur venture. And then for people that are just curious, we have all sorts of information on the blog and broadcast to help people think about, what do I want to do with the rest of my life?
I love that.
Go ahead.
I love that. And also, I'm so curious, because I've had a couple of clients over the years that their audience that they were serving was an audience of legacy leavers, or people that were ready to leave their legacy. A lot of times it was men, like accomplished men that had been high-powered executives that were kind of coming off of that. And that's a hard act to follow for a lot of people. They don't feel as important or as competent, which you mentioned, moving into that stage where that doesn't matter as much. But one of the things that I noticed was it was really difficult for me to help them with their messaging. And I am really good with messaging, but I found it hard to find that pain where they were so ready to move into building that legacy. It was like they kind of wanted it, or they thought it was cool, but they had other things going on. And so how do you speak to people to where they really get it and they're like, yes, I need this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that at some point, we can also look at I think you're probably both familiar with James Hollis's work. He's a Jungian analyst that publishes on Sounds True. And he often talks about the first half of life and the second half of life. Father James Rohrer talks about this as well. One of the things that I have noticed is that, and as you said, Kylie, can frequently be very successful men have they've done what they're supposed to do. They went to school and got good grades. They went to a good college and got good grades. They went out into the workplace and got a good job and moved up the corporate ladder. They did all the things that the external world was telling them they needed to do to achieve. And at some point, many of them had this nagging small voice in the back of their head saying, I think there's got to be more to it than this. And because of sunk costs, they have so much invested, not just financially in their education and what they earn, for a living, but also all the status and that they have invested in what they do for a living, that it's hard to give it up. And so at some point, I think many of us have to hear our life speaking to us so that it can start happening through us. And if you're ready to do that, then that's where this path of the second half of life begins, what David Brooks calls the second mountain. The first half of life is about success and achievement and money or salary and status and stuff. And the second half is more about legacy, impact, making a difference, finding joy, as opposed to the empty pursuit of happiness that most of us pursue in the first half of life. And so sometimes, and I just want to share for anyone listening that, this is resonating a little bit, but they're feeling a little bit of shame or regret. It's not your fault, because this is the way society has programmed us. We are born sufficient and whole with everything that we need to survive and thrive in this world. And then we get encultured through society, parents, school, occupation, into denying our basic human nature, our soul's purpose. And so it's not your fault. But if you recognize that there is another way, that there is a path that might lead to more joy, equanimity, and impact, then it does become your responsibility to explore that. And so a lot of times, a lot of my work is helping them see something and seeing that there's another way, in a way that they can't unsee, and creating enough empathetic antagonism and generous tension for them to step into their potential and possibility in another way of being in the world, which is actually the way they were born, the way they've always been. So it's in their becoming that they can be what they were always meant to have been.
Yeah, this is really fascinating, because I've been kind of enamored with this idea of identity shift, and how somebody can shift, who they see themselves in the present, but also that we're complex beings, and that we have this unique ability to have multiple identities. And so this is really interesting to me. How do you recommend that person tries to evolve who they are, or that it's more like a paradigm phase shift where they, assume a new role or become a new type of person? Does that make sense?
It does. And it's a really fascinating question. And what comes to mind for me, Richard, is I love what you were saying. I call it a creative on purpose. We call it the identity trap. We over-identify with our role as provider, in our role at work, in our role as a parent, as a spouse, whatever it is. And we have been fed another lie, at least here in the United States, about this idea of work-life balance, that you have two buckets and you have to make sure that they're evenly filled. And that is a delusion and an invitation to shame and suffering, because you are many things, as you said, Richard, and you're many things all at once. And so instead of work-life balance, and instead of trying to move from identity to identity, role to role in your day-to-day, why not just be who you are all day long, everywhere you go? And so we talk about work-life integration. And this was the big shift for me. Was, there was a point at which I was a father who was homeschooling his kids. So I was a teacher to them. I was a husband. I was a musician. I was a guitar teacher. And I was a coach at akimbo workshops. And as I moved through the day, I felt like I was always changing hats and shifting gears, and I would be exhausted at the end of the day. And one day I just said, what if I just showed up as Scott Perry all day long, everywhere I went? And it was energizing, and it removed so much dissonance and static. And I just had much more energy, much more bandwidth. And I didn't, that what you're saying, Richard, is this idea of we have to change our mask as we go through the day, and it's exhausting. So I think that's part of it. And the other part of it is we talk a lot in conscious endeavor about transformation. And what we forget is that transformation is a moment. And it's the last moment in a long series of transitions that you don't notice until you reach a critical mass, a tipping point, at which point you say, aha, I've had this epiphany. Well, the epiphany is just the moment when you finally hear what life has been telling you, and what fate, whatever you want to call it, destiny has, when you accept that you're on the path now, and you can see it, and you can embrace it and embody it everywhere you go.
I love that. That's super powerful. And as you were speaking, I thought, man, this guy is super smart. Like, I want to download your brain. And also, I hope that you do write a book about all of this, because I think it's really important. And I want to backpedal for a minute, because you said one of the most interesting things I've ever heard in marketing, which is this idea of empathetic antagonism. And I'm like, ooh, I feel like I could make $1 million more if I knew what that was. Will you explain that?
Sure. Well, it's a word that I came up with because, there's, and I remember talking to you all about this and getting a lot of great insight about this idea of finding the pain point and agitating the pain point. That's something that marketers talk about that are not as conscious. And maybe, that can be a real manipulation. But there is also, so there's the manipulative use of pain. And then there's the empathetic acknowledgement and helping someone see and see and acknowledge, notice and name. And the empathetic antagonism is holding a safe and brave space for them so that they can see the challenge, what's in their way, see how they are complicit in creating that challenge, but also see that they have the capacity to solve that problem themselves, with or without the help of a trusted guide, fellowship of fellow travelers, or what have you. And so empathetic antagonism is just taking this idea of creating tension, which you have to do to get someone to take action, and doing it in a way that is full of empathy, compassion, and generosity, and lets the student, the client, the customer find their way into it, so that because they ultimately will be the ones that take action.
I love that. That makes me so happy to hear.
I feel like in the current world, there has been so much change and volatility. It seems like there's been two maybe directions people go. And I think on one side, it's like, let's ground in and, protect what we have and not change anything, And then there's three views. There's a neutral view, which is like, I'm just going to see what happens, and not have an opinion or do anything. And then there's maybe this third view of like, well, I'm going to use this time to change my career or to shift into the third act of life or second act of life, or actually pivot. And so I'd be curious, because you work with people who are going through change, how can you encourage maybe somebody that's neutral to take action and to move forward, or somebody who's going through change maybe to manage that volatility, that crisis a little bit better, so that it's a little bit smoother, it's a little bit rough, and they can have maybe a smoother landing, maybe.
Yeah. No, I love the distinctions that you made, Richard, because I think you're right. There's people that are heavily invested in the status quo, keeping things just the way they are, because that's what they know, and therefore it feels safe. Even if it's not serving them, they'd rather just stay where they are. And then there's people at the other end of the spectrum that are willing to explore the edges of their understanding and ability in a pursuit of making things better for themselves and other people. And then there's maybe even the majority of people that are just like, somebody tell me what to do. Give me the checklist, give me the roadmap, give me the blueprint. And so I think that one of the levers that we pull at Creative on Purpose and in the art of encore living is let's just acknowledge what is true. And what is true is that there is no roadmap. There is no blueprint. A map can only show you how to get where other people have gone in the same way that they got there. And you are a completely unique, idiosyncratic being with experiences and knowledge and wisdom that can only be delivered in a certain way through the filter of your perspective and experience. So there is not this scarcity, as you were referring to, that the people that are invested in the status quo want to protect. There's actually an abundance of opportunity. And if you embrace that idea, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as you step into possibility, as you embrace that abundance and start to see it, you see that not only is there an abundance of opportunity and privilege and all that for you, but that there's plenty to spread around. And that's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of about the work that we did at Akimbo is, in the wake of George Floyd, when we were forced to all take a look around at, what does the group of people around me look like? And we realized we were not doing really well in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And we made a big investment in changing that. And for me, that's when I realized the scarcity model, the systemic, just fuels a systemic oppression. And it's false. If we embrace that there is an abundance of opportunity and make room for everyone, then we will just create more opportunity. And the makeup of our community changed dramatically in just a year, just by changing that mindset around scarcity. There's nothing but opportunity. And to directly answer your question, when I am working with someone and we're talking about like this, what gives life meaning? What gives life meaning is that it will end. And what gives life meaning is, what are you going to do during that journey from womb to tomb? And one of the things that we say at Creative on Purpose all the time is, don't die with the difference only you can make still inside. And when people hear that, that's some empathetic antagonism. And it's undeniably true that you have potential that you're not tapping and promise that you're not delivering. And the invitation is, let's work together to make things better. Better for you, better for the people that you care about.
I hear that message a lot in sort of hustle culture, where it's like, you're here to make a difference. Go push boulders up a hill until you sweat blood and like all that. And I mean, I'm not afraid of some grit. I love grit. I'm really happy to work hard, but it sounds to me like you're kind of talking about the opposite of that. And I'm curious your thoughts about that. How do people accomplish and achieve and do what they're here to do and not die with what is inside them, and do it in a way that's really aligned? Because to me, it sounds like you're truly talking about alignment. And I'm curious about that, just to offer people a different alternative.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that, Kylie. The grind and grit and the hustle is kind of coming out of that old paradigm. And what we encourage people to do is, let's define what's essential, and then let's figure out how to do it effortlessly. And the first thing that we do with someone just coming into our ecosystem is we take a survey of 3 things. Who are you? What are you good at? Where do you belong? Who are you? What are your core values? What are your guiding principles? What's the vision of the world that you would love to co-create? That's who you are. What you're good at is much more than the sum of all the hard skills you learned in school and all the job. It's the soft skills of human-to-human connection, communication, collaboration, and creativity, in addition to the talents that you were born with. We all are born with some inherent capacities and some inherent deficiencies. And then if you look at who you really are and what you're really good at, you can determine what your gift is. And then all you have to do is find where you belong, which I know sounds a little glib when I say it like that, but you simply belong with people who share your values and need your talents to enhance their lives. And we can take people through that process in a few hours or just a weekend. And at the center of that Venn diagram, suddenly they will start to be able to brainstorm some ideas for what is that encore-preneurial venture going to be. Am I going to create a cause? Am I going to create a community? Am I going to create a course, a blog, a broadcast, a book, whatever it's going to be. But you can start to think about doing work with purpose, on purpose, with and for people that you care about.
Kind of following on that, Scott, do you find that people kind of moving into that next phase, they tend to undershoot a lot of times? Or like, because I don't think as human beings, we've been trained very well to think like in terms of like 10 years or 20 years. We tend to think like, what do I have to do? Like, maybe the max is like, most people are like, what do I going to do this year? But so I think these longer time frames are a little more unnatural for kind of our Western mind, who maybe is more individualist and goal oriented. So how do you help people to, give them permission, I guess would be one way to say it, to step into a much bigger vision, even if they themselves don't even think it's possible? Because a lot of times we talk to people and we're just trying to help people to see that it's even possible that they could do these things.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant insight, because we have been taught to set these long-term goals, and to Kylie's point, put the blinders on and grind our way to them. And oftentimes what happens, that you're talking to the CEO that's stuck with his law practice at the detriment of his health, his relationships, and everything else, because it wasn't really his soul's calling. He just had too much sunk costs invested to think that he or she could have quit. And at the same time, I think it's important that we do set a point on the horizon that we're heading to, but we have to acknowledge that as we're stepping into that, there's opportunities that are going to come our way that we never could have imagined. There's going to be obstacles that come across our path that we never could have imagined. And so while we want to set that point on the horizon, we also want to be very present in the here and now, and taking advantage of opportunities and negotiating obstacles. What I have found happen is that people end up not exactly hitting the bullseye of their initial aim or aspiration, but they end up somewhere really great and probably where they were meant to go all along. And so the secret to me, to answer your question, Richard, is what is the smallest viable step that you could take right now? And so our approach for helping people build and scale their enterprises: smallest viable audience, which I stole from Seth Godin; smallest viable offer. What's the thing that you could offer someone before you even built it, that you could build in a weekend and then deliver on after you got people to sign up? And then what's the smallest step into possibility and potential that you could take with them? And the thing is, we all think, and I remember you all talking about mindsets at the beginning of the Conscious Launch Accelerator, and mindset is so important. But I think what we sometimes forget is that mindset doesn't inform posture. Posture informs mindset. You can't, when you were a baby and you wanted to learn how to talk, you didn't say, "Oh, I got to get my mindset right, and then I'll be able to talk." You talked badly on your way to talking well. And so, that's again, part of this. Your becoming is actually already you were invested in your Ben. You were at one point in your life a fearless creative, fearlessly going after all the things that you wanted. You wanted to talk, so you talked. You talked badly until you talked well. You wanted to walk. You walked badly until you walked well. And you didn't have a guide. You didn't have an instruction manual. You didn't have an online course to take or YouTube videos to watch. You just simply did it. And you earned clarity and confidence through the act of doing. And so that's, I think, the really important part of this is set that point on the horizon, take the smallest step, and now you are in motion. Every step you take, you're in a new situation where you can take a look around, see what the opportunities are, with intention and integrity, decide which of those opportunities is next, and then take a step into that possibility.
Yeah, I've always found that momentum is super important. It's sometimes when I'm working with people, I just want to move them in any direction because I know that it will correct. It'll it'll course correct. And I mean, that's a principle that's in almost every major spiritual book in the world. It's like, just do it and I will tell you where to go. And a lot of times people want, you've spoken to this earlier, but a lot of times people want that specific structure. In the beginning of my career, I just knew how to tell stories. I just made it up and saw if it worked or not. So I would teach people and I would be like, well, just write a story, and they wanted the steps. And so I was like, what would the steps be, of what I just did? And so I learned to create processes and steps and all of that over the years. But for me, I never actually needed to follow them. I always worked on instinct. So what do you think about that? Like this idea of having a roadmap versus just being instinctual?
Yeah, well, it's, again, you both do this so brilliantly. There's no one way to get from where you are to where you want to be, because part of it is where you want to be may not be the actual right place for you. And so rather than provide the roadmap or the blueprint, you help them build a compass. Because if you teach people to use a compass, then you have, it's the old biblical adage of, teach a person to fish, they fish for a day, or, catch a person to fish versus teaching them to fish. If you teach someone to fish, they can fish forever. If you teach someone how to build and use their inner compass, they can use it for the rest of their lives. And so I think that's the other thing that I think you're speaking to, Kylie, is the importance of faith, right? Faith is trusting. One of my favorite quotes of all time is Goethe's quote, "As soon as you trust yourself, you will know how to live." And it's true. And it's an adage about the importance of faith. You have to have faith in yourself. You have to have faith that destiny will unfold the way it's meant to unfold, and that every step of the way you will trust yourself enough to make an informed decision with intention and with integrity. And if it doesn't work out, that you'll figure it out. And that, this is how we achieve meaning in our lives. It's a life of meaning is not a life without challenge. It's not a life of ticking the boxes and following the roadmap. A life of meaning is a life where you engage in work that's worth it, and you engage with all the challenges inherent in that journey, and with integrity and with intention and with and for people that you care about, and meaning will naturally occur.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying, and there's so many phrases you've come up with here, but I even like the idea of teaching people how to use the compass, because my mind kind of went to, well, when do you know if you're off track, and how fast is the journey going, and is the journey pleasurable? And so it's such a great idea. Well, I even love your company name, Creative on Purpose. It's been a real pleasure, Scott. If people want to find out more about you and kind of check out your services and hire you as a coach or whatever, where do they go?
If you go to creativeonpurpose.com, you will learn everything you want to learn about the art of encore living. There's plenty of free resources in the blog and the broadcast. If you would like to explore the idea of working together, there's a quick survey that you can take that will enable you to hop on a 30-minute call with me. And we have a course in a community that if you want to take a lower impact way of kind of dipping your toe in the water, you can do it that way as well. So creativeonpurpose.com is where to find me.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's been a real pleasure to have you on board. I look forward to kind of continuing our conversation and finding ways that we can keep interacting and working together. Thanks so much, Scott. You're really a blessing to the world and helping so many people out there with your work. We really appreciate you.
Well, you and Kylie have been a huge influence on my journey, and I'm deeply grateful for the work that you do and the difference that you all make and the impact that you've had on my life. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So thanks again, Scott. Thanks everybody for listening to our broadcast today. And if you want to get the show notes and the links to the program, you can go to consciousmarketer.com/podcast and just look up Scott Perry there, and you'll get this interview. You can also find us on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this. Thanks again for listening in today, and we will look forward to having you on the next episode. Thanks. Bye for now.